Good evening, everyone. First of all, thanks, Mark, for these kind words. For me, it's an honor to be here and to share some thoughts about this relevant topic on behalf of Aspire Academy and Football Insights Department. In the next couple of minutes, I will cover basically these three topics, right? Data management and its complexity here in this country. Second, some data evaluation based on all data collected. And third, some reporting example on how can we use data to apply and to create some impact. Okay, let's see my arrow here. Okay, so regarding this first topic, we know that the amount of data collected currently is really massive. So here, for instance, in our academy, we are collecting data from under 13 teams up to the under 18 teams, also using different devices. But this is just a small part of the puzzle because we're also collecting data from the national teams, from under 16 until the first team. And we are also collecting data here from all the clubs in our league using also different devices. So all this data is located in one same platform, which allows us to visualize this data, use different devices like, tools like Power BI, R, SAP, which we can provide a long-term development of our players from youth to senior, right? So which is a unique environment around the world. Okay, regarding our second topic here, how to evaluate our performance data based on all data that is currently gathered here. We can just basically share some basic steps here to be followed when we speak about collecting data. So from collecting data until using this data itself. So we can collect data from the status of our players regarding athlete self-reporting measurements, or neuromuscular and functional variables, as Phil just covered really well before. We have also this moment to staff feedback. It's the moment that we report the key aspects and we support the decision-making process. So this is a really important moment, the moment that we need to speak their language. The moment that we provide the right information that should be used in a regular basis. We also have this moment of the in-session analysis, the moment that we have this real-time monitoring and we have this target analysis. So this is the moment that we can compare what was planned before and what is currently doing in the session, and then we can see what can be done in order to achieve the target set before. And also we have this post-session analysis moment, which is the moment that we can compare the actual data with some benchmarks, which I will share in few slides later. And also we can define some key aspects that should be addressed in the staff feedback meeting. So this is just a framework, as Marco really showed really well, a lot of frameworks also. This is just a framework on how to use from collecting data into using this data itself. And in regards to this analysis itself, there are two main aspects that should be emphasized. So instead of using absolute speed zones, we are proposing using relative speed zones based on performance assessment variables like maximum aerobic speed, maximum sprint speed, and anaerobic speed reserve. So in regard to maximum sprint speed, it's important to emphasize that, which is a really important component of our long-term development here in the academy. This is a really interesting paper published by some colleagues here, which allows us using the GPS data to track this information because it aligns with the LAVEX system, which is a gold standard system to analyze this metric. Okay, so going in depth on the benchmark definition, we can have here two kinds of benchmarks. So basically, we can compare the load of the player with match data, just a matter of having the ratio of the actual load with the match load of the player, and we can have this percentage, and we can also classify. Here we start speaking about delivering a message. In order to, instead of only providing the number, the value, we are providing the message here, which is low load, moderate load, or high load. We can also use the match data with the week comparison, as we can compare the accumulated load, and we can classify how many times we cover the match during the week, and to classify and to use the colors to show like low load, moderate load, and high load. But we know that sometimes it's a bit complicated using match data as reference, because we cannot have data maybe for all players or for all metrics. And in order to solve this issue, we propose using historical data. So in this case, we are delivering a different message. The message is typical load, higher, lower load, or much higher or much lower load, based on historical data for that specific player, for that specific date type, which is really specific, but the message here is different. So going in depth on this example, we can see here the percentiles that we are using. So basically we rank all the data for that player from the highest load to the lowest load. Using the percentiles, we can set the boundaries here, percentile 2.5, 15, 85, and 97.5, and we can arrive in these 5 groups here. It's much lower, lower, typical, higher, and much higher. So just as an example, we have here 16 observations for the same player, okay? And if we rank them using the percentiles, we can set these boundaries here. So just an example, if we target for this player a much higher training session, this player should cover more than 7K to arrive in this group and this interpretation. We can also classify all the historical data on all those groups, and we can see all the sessions in which group they stand. So for instance, a much lower training session, a lower training session, typical training session, a higher training session, and a much higher training session. So this is just an example. I know that sometimes it could be a bit complicated from the coach point of view to understand all these calculations, these percentiles, and these statistics behind of that, but we don't need to explain that. So if they want, no problem, but they need only to understand the message. As I showed before, we are delivering here a message, so they need to understand in which group this player stands in that session. So for instance, this player run more than 7K, it means like a much higher training session, which is, this is the message that we are focused on delivering. Okay, regarding the third topic here, some example on how we are reporting data here in the Academy. We can see here some core concepts that we use it here in order to build the visuals needed. So we know that using all the softwares like Power BI, like R, like SAP, we can build a lot and thousands of graphs. But here, instead of building thousands of graphs and repeating the same information and the same data in different graphs, we propose using analyzing first the questions. So what are the main questions that we are receiving frequently from the staff, from coaches, SNCs, physios? So we started from the questions and we finished in the visual. So this framework is just to emphasize and to organize our thoughts in order to see what are the visuals that should be created. And this framework starts from questions and finishes visuals. So it's really easy for everyone, for all members of our staff, to go to this framework based on the questions that they started. Okay, in the beginning of this framework, they arrive in a visual that answer the questions that they have. I will show this framework later on. We can also, and this is another core concept used here in the Academy, is thinking about the story. So we are not only providing data here. As I mentioned before, the amount of data collected regularly is massive. We have thousands and thousands of data, of files, whatever. We need to use this data into information, because once we have the information, we are creating knowledge. So just an example, as I mentioned before, if that player that I showed in our picture, if that player run 8K, for instance, this is a data. What does it mean for him? So it means like a much higher training session. Okay, but what should we do now? So maybe we should manage his load in the following session, because what we planned yesterday was not a much higher session. We planned a typical session for him. Okay, so this is a kind of using data and telling the story based on data, where we have many data, much data here, but we need to use this into information to create some knowledge. Sorry. And also the third part is this part of interaction. So all dashboards here that we built are really interactive. So we can play around many periods in different periods, day, weeks, month, whatever. We can set different drills, elements of the session, first set, second set, total session of our exercise that we did. We can also select different players, positions, and also different metrics. So everything here is open, nothing is fixed, so everyone can go to this dashboard to understand what we done, what can be done, and to arrive in the message that they need. Okay, so this is our framework that we built. So we can start here from session day, some drill analysis, longitudinal, and match. Okay, regarding the session itself, we can start here from the session day overview. This is to answer the question of the most frequent question that we are receiving, like, how was the session? Okay, so if you want to see like an overview of the session, we go here for the visual number 1. Okay, so if you want to see like some target analysis, as I mentioned before, we have this moment to analyze the target during the match. Okay, so we go here for the live track analysis. We start from the in-session analysis, but if we have this in-session analysis, we don't need any visual. But if we don't have, we go to the post-session analysis and we arrive in the visual to answer that question. But we can delve in the session itself, analyze some drills. So if I want to see the impact per drill in the players in the same session, we arrive in this visual. If you want to see like historically, how was the most demanding drill? Okay, you go to visual number 4, you can arrive. Also, you can find the answer to this question. And in a bigger picture, we can analyze weeks. So we can analyze the week within the week, how the week progressed, how the load was built during the week. We can see also the week overview. We can compare weeks by weeks with the same concept of historical data. And we can also see the week by week progression, how the week, each week compared to the last one. Yeah, this is as a longer term picture. And also in the match, we can also use the same for the session day overview. So just to provide some examples on how we are using in this pathway the graphs and reports. So here we have the session overview report based using the match as the benchmark. So as you can see here, we have the actual load for each player, and the black dots are the values from the matches, and the colors are based on this classification that I mentioned before. So we can see here easily that the major of the players arrived in the low load session, but we have here 3 players for this specific metric that arrived in a higher session. That should be discussed and contextualize this data to understand why this happened. So this is really straightforward to understand, using a proper benchmark, using colors to report, and we are also delivering a message. So this player run close to his match demand. So the coach will understand that easily. In a few seconds also using the color, they can understand all the concepts behind this visual. We can also analyze the session as a historical data session. Like for instance, here we have our historical data with this classification as I mentioned before. So we can see here the players that had much lower and lower training session, typical training sessions, and higher training sessions. So for each player here, we have the black lines, which are the boundaries that I mentioned before in the bell-shaped curve. So this is an important moment also to share this data because it's also easy to understand. So here we can see like the majority of the player arrived in a typical session, but we have here 2 players that arrived in a much higher session for this specific metric. So it's easy, it's straightforward, the message that we are trying to highlight, use this kind of representation. We can also go to this other pathway for the weekly analysis. So this is a week prioritization. This is a really interesting one. We have here the daily load of the week, okay, comparing to the match using the same benchmark showed before. And we can also see here the weekly prioritization based on the accumulated load throughout the week. So as the week progressed, we can see how the load was built during the week compared to the match to arrive in the message how many matches we covered during the week. So another interpretation, again using colors, but the same benchmark to analyze the week now instead of only analyzing a daily session in isolated. And in here we can see another pathway to arrive at this visual. This is the weekly overview. It's the same concept used in the day type, historical data, but this is a week comparison. We are comparing here week by week in the same percentiles, in the same concept before. So we can see what are the players that arrived in a typical week, in a higher week, and in a much higher week. So we can see here for this specific metric in the same concept as I showed before. So this is really useful to analyze when we finish a week here in the academy, but also During the week, you can see if we decided some targets based on this classification, you can see how far they are from that target as the week progresses. This red flag system could also be used for this training status evaluation. As I mentioned before, there is a moment that we are collecting information from atlas of reported measurements, and based on this really interesting paper, we can see here the players that had higher answers and much higher answers based on their own historical data. Then we can provide the same information to the staff right before the session to arrive in the message, like how are the players before the session, how they are based on their own feeling. Just to finish, as a take-home message, we are providing here not only high-quality data, but also its interpretation, which means telling the story. In order to arrive in that message, we should have a robust data management, appropriate benchmarks, and powerful visualization. So I would like to thank you all for your attention. Again, Marco and all involved here in this forum, and all the members involved in all these discussions to arrive in such level of visualization. Thank you very much.